blue.
We're on. All right. So I am going to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, September 22nd, 2015, and this is the meeting of the Justice Reinvestment Grant Review Committee. We're going to start out with quick introductions of the folks who are up here on the dais, and then we'll dig right in.
Stuart Roberts, Chief of Police, Pendleton.
Tim Colahan, Harney County District Attorney.
Kiki Park Rose, Klamath County Community Corrections.
Senator Jackie Winters.
Jim Bernard, I'm a Clackamas County Commissioner.
Tim Moore, I'm Chief Deputy with Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, here in place of Sheriff Staten.
And I am Jennifer Williamson, State Representative. So I want to start, before I turn it over to Mike and Paul, Ross and Tiffany, that I just want to thank the counties for putting together these materials. I think they were really well done, really well thought out. I think folks were true to the spirit of 3194 in looking at how they could work in their counties, work together to meet the spirit of the law. And so I wanted to start by thanking everyone. I know a lot of work went into this, and I know that commission staff put a lot of work into this, so thank you all. We have a lot of materials to go through today, and the team in front of us will walk us through all of this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Mr. Schmidt. The show is yours.
Thank you, Chair Williamson. And Members Committee, Mike Schmidt, the Director of the Criminal Justice Commission. I'll introduce my team up here. Paul Egbert to my left, our Operations Manager at CJC, head of the grant team. Tiffany Quintero, Ross Caldwell, and Ben Wyatt comprise the grants team who have been working extremely hard with the counties to get these applications together. In the back of the room, we have our criminologist, Ann Lehman, and our head researcher, Kelly Officer, and they have been also weighing in on the applications. Just a quick thanks to my team. What you all have in front of you is a product of so much work that we have all been putting in, and with the counties who have also been doing great work. But I wanted to point out that what you have in front of you has really kind of been an iterative process. I mean, we've been going back and forth with the counties. They have been reaching out to staff, which has been great. We've read many rough drafts of applications and gotten it back and gone back and forth. And all of that was with the goal to get you all as much information as you possibly could have in front of you. And I point that out because as we go through each of these programs today, as staff walks you through each of the applications, there might be things that you don't see or questions that you have that you didn't see in the application. But each one of these represents a lot of conversations that have happened over the telephone, discussions about what these things mean. So if you have those questions, staff has probably had that conversation. So ask those questions as we go through them. There's a lot of background information, and they've just done tremendous work in a lot of it to get these all ready for you today. So with that, I asked to have this first slide put in, and if you want to click through there. And I think, does everyone have a paper copy of this? Okay, so Tiffany's going to hand out a paper copy.
We don't have a paper copy.
Of this graph to each of you. And the purpose of giving you a paper copy of this to add to your already mountainous stack of paper is so that you can kind of keep it in front of you as we go through the applications, and it gives you a good sense of scale of how we are looking at prison usage in 3194 in the state. Once everyone has those, I'll kind of just explain the chart and then kind of what we're thinking. So this graph lists all 36 counties, and what we're measuring here, the black line, which is labeled threshold at the bottom, is the 3-year average prison usage for property and drug crimes, all the 3194 listed crimes in the rules, by county. And so we have essentially, and working with the counties, said this is your 3-year average. And what we'd like to see is that you are, in terms of bringing down Department of Corrections prison usage, you are working to get underneath your average. You can see the way we've labeled things is if you were less in the last year than your 3-year average, that's shown in the bar graph and you're in green. If you are 0 to 10% above your 3-year average in the last year, you're yellow. And if you're more than 10% above your 3-year average in this area, then we've labeled it as red. The reason we're pointing this out is because the counties in the last biennium were not asked to specifically hit any kind of a mark or anything like that. It was just, please work on Department of Corrections usage. In this grants process, we very much are saying that we want to see Department of Corrections be one of the top priorities in the grant programs that you're proposing to fund. And the reason I start out with this today for you all is because it's kind of unfortunate timing. Today's September 22nd. On October 1st, the next prison forecast is going to be released. So the next time that this committee gets together, you'll have that information in front of you. It's not finalized at this point. It's still in draft form. We're still working on it and working with the Governor's Office, Department of Corrections, Office of Economic Analysis, and of course the CJC to figure out what's happening and why and all of that information, which you'll have next time. But the Prison Forecast Committee met a couple weeks ago, and what is clear to us is that they are forecasting that in the next 3 to 4 months we're going to see a substantial increase in our prison population. That will be threatening to the Justice Reinvestment Program, to put it very bluntly. That kind of an increase that we're projected to see in the next 3 months is going to challenge the Department of Corrections and how they can maintain the population within the walls that they have. And of course, it doesn't need to really be said to any of you that with a big increase in the Department of Corrections budget next time would probably spell bad things for the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program.
Mike, what do we know right now? I know the numbers aren't final, but what have you gleaned from the numbers as far as what's driving it, and do we know where and why those numbers look the way they do?
So, we are finalizing the draft, as you said. What we know now is, surprisingly enough, it's not prison intakes that seems to be driving the increase. We have, over the past year, really held intakes as a state flat. Now, counties, some counties are up, some counties are down, but as a state, the intakes have been held flat. It's the release profile of the inmates that seems to have shifted, and the Office of Economic Forecasting is calling it an anomaly, but what they're seeing is over the next 3 months, for whatever reason, those release profiles are lengthened. So sentences are longer slightly, and even when we're talking about small percentage increases, per inmate, we're talking for property inmates a month to a month and a half longer than they might have served 2 years ago. And for person crimes, that magnitude gets a little bit bigger because their sentences are longer. So even a percentage intake in a long sentence or a percentage increase in a longer sentence means several more months of an increase in sentence. So it really is the release profile that is driving the next 3 months of increases. Where we expected to see a drop, we're not going to see that. We're going to see the prison population continue to increase.
So the intakes will stay flat.
The intakes are projected to stay flat.
Will take longer. And are you working with DOC to figure out why that is?
We
What's
are.
different about those profiles?
That's right. Yeah, we're working with them now to try to put some answers to what happened and how it is that we're arriving at this now and not previously.
So it may have nothing to do with the work that we're doing.
Or it could.
Or it could.
Or it could. So we got to find some answers to those. And I mean, we are very much we're targeting in these grants the property and drug crimes. Person crimes are a big driver in this as well. So we have to look at all those things. It's not one magic bullet that's driving everything. So I wanted to give you this information now because you will have it next time, and I think it's important in how you evaluate these grant applications as we go forward.
Mike, when you, the next time when you do the, this graft, would you do a legend?
Yes.
It would be helpful so that you know that green stands for yellow, black, and what have you.
Yep.
It's kind of helpful because, you know, we see so many graphs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Particularly when you start talking about that we're seeing this issue on the release profiles and the impact on DOC, and able to drill down into which county where we're having the biggest problems per counties.
Yep.
And Mike, these are absolute numbers, right? I
These
just
are
wanna make sure
absolute
that-
total prison usage, yeah.
So what I'm seeing is Marion County and Lane County having more raw numbers than Multnomah County?
That's correct.
Okay.
They used more prison than Multnomah County. What this chart doesn't tell you is, I mean, it is very kind of a blunt instrument. It's just adding all the months up. It doesn't tell you about intakes. It doesn't tell you about revocations.
Right.
It doesn't tell you about average length of stay. And in different counties, it's a different combination of factors. So this is just adding up all the prison that they use on these property and drug crimes. And the silver lining, if there is a silver lining to this bad news, is that what's not in the forecast is how our grant programs can affect the prison population. We are not forecasting that if the counties invest in supervision and invest in treatment and practices and housing and all the things that the counties are asking to be granted with you today, we're not forecasting how that will impact. So it's not completely written in stone how this forecast goes. We can still have an impact if the counties can use these resources and use them in a way that both keeps their community safe, but really targets those folks who can be safely supervised in their communities and keeping them there instead of going to the Department of Corrections. So it's not, like I say, it's not in stone. There is, we can change the forecast, but it's going to take a lot of work on the county's parts, and so hopefully that gives you a somber but appropriate lens to evaluate the applications as we go forward.
So my question, and I don't know if you keep these kind of statistics, but do you know if they're trial sentences or negotiated settlements?
It's probably going to be the majority is negotiated, just being that we know that 90 to 95% of all cases don't actually make it to the trial phase. So the bulk is going to be negotiated sentences. What we don't know, and I don't believe that we have looked at it this way, is the difference in average length of stay between a trial sentence versus a negotiated sentence. My previous career or my previous experience would tell me that the trial sentences would be longer than a negotiated sentence on average for similar crimes.
Mike, do you know are the number of people that are eligible for short-term trans leave? Do we have counties that are absolutely not accepting those, and is that impacting then your length of stay?
Short-term trans leave is actually operating exactly how we have projected it to be. Of all the inmates who would be eligible for short-term trans leave, we have always forecasted that 50% would receive it, 50% wouldn't, and we're pretty much spot on in those numbers, so we haven't changed our forecast there. That being said, some of the applications that you see in front of you talk about adding housing, which I think has been the biggest factor in the counties that have been more reticent to take more people. It's because of lack of housing. So there are some counties that have that deficit, and that has been a pressure point of not accepting more people on short-term trans leave. But as a system-wide whole, it's operating like we thought it would.
Mike, one of the pieces of legislation we passed this past session had to do with the work group to work on housing and employment. You mentioned housing. What about employment?
Employment is one of those things that we it's hard for us to track. We know, especially in the short-term trans leave population, that's an area that we want to have that kind of information. Working with the DOC system, it's challenging to aggregate all of that, but I think it's an area that we need to continue to look at to see if we're seeing a market improvement, because obviously we know that employment is one of those things that helps us keep people from recidivating. So we need to do a better job of tracking that, and we don't have those numbers right now. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul. He'll give you kind of an overview of this presentation, how it was put together, and then we will go county by county through the applications.
Well, and before Paul starts, if it's okay with the folks up here at the dais, what I'd like to do is go through all of the counties, and then we can vote in a block, so that we can just look at the information and ask questions, and then decide yes or no on a slate, as opposed to doing it for each county. I think that'll be a more efficient way to deal with it. All right, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So the next few slides just overview why we're here and our process, and even we'll lay out how we've organized the slides for you to consider today. So the responsibility of this committee is to look at each grant application according to the following criteria. The solicitation has two parts essentially in it. Part one is interested in the community-based programs that the county wants to install that get at the 4 goals of justice reinvestment. So reduction in recidivism, a reduction in the utilization of prison, increasing public safety, and holding offenders accountable. So the part 1 sections of our presentation will deal with those community programs. Part 2 deals with what we wanted to do with the 10% victim money. And you can see the criteria here. So an emphasis on targeting marginalized, underserved populations, addressing barriers to getting services, increasing capacity where access is difficult, and then investment in trauma-informed services. So to overview our process as CJC staff, I just want to point a couple things out. We have 2 deadlines in the solicitation, an expedited deadline, which ended August 19th. We had 15 counties essentially get their application in by that earlier deadline. And then we have our final deadline, October 14th. All of the staff here in the room helped review these applications. We looked at them on a daily basis between August 25th and September 4th, ahead of the time that the victim expert panel would be reviewing these applications around the Part 2. In all cases, we asked applicants for outcomes and outputs of how they'd like to measure the success of their programs. And in all cases, we'll need to work with counties to refine those measures and to get at the heart of what it is we need to have them report on. But they've made some excellent suggestions, and we're going to enhance and refine those with them. So that work will continue up until we execute a contract with the counties. There were some of the narratives within the applications that just required more clarification. Some of that clarification is in your packets in the form of those email exchanges we had. And then the staff will have some responses and up-to-date information that didn't make it into your packet. So there'll be an opportunity to get those questions answered. September 8th, the expert victim panel met, convened, and reviewed all of the Part 2 sections of these 15 applications and made recommendations to this committee. And then in each of the cases of these 15 applications, all the counties remitted their 3% evaluation portion to the CJC to conduct statewide evaluation. So in terms of the goals of this grant, the entire application on its whole had to meet the 4 goals of justice reinvestment. And based on our review and work on these applications, we believe the applications met those 4 goals. However, when they look at the particular specific investments or programs that they want to implement or encourage in their counties, they only had to link to one of the 4 goals. They didn't have to meet all 4 goals with each proposal within their application. Of course, the quality of what the impact of these programs will be monitored over the biennium. And if it wasn't clear to us how they made a link to a particular goal, we sought more information. So that's some of what you see in the back and forth with the emails. Each of the staff, since there's 15, each of the staff of Tiffany, Ben, and Ross up here at the table will present 5 counties today and share slides with you and some information about their proposals. And then each county's set of slides will have our recommendations in them for you to consider. And if we did rehabilitation efforts, we'll include that information. If you're curious about that, we should have that for you. We know of 5 applications that we spent significant time rehabilitating before getting to the point of recommending. One is Lane County. They had a batterers intervention program, and you'll see in the individual slides that they withdrew that portion of their application and would like that to be considered at the later date. So we're working with them to get either repurpose those monies or strengthen that particular proposal in some manner. Lynn County had an 8th grade transition program, looked like a wonderful program, just didn't meet the goals of justice reinvestment. So that's been repurposed in their application. 2 of our victim proposals needed adjustment and changes, and so that was Crook County and Grant County, and both of them have adjusted their proposals to target those funds that better meet the goals of the victim service portion. And Lincoln County had a transition program that we spent significant time working with them on to get that to the point where it really linked with the goals better. In all cases, though, there was exchanges back and forth with the counties. This is just an overview slide. So we're looking at just over $14 million in program funds in this earlier expedited time frame to award, $1.6 million in victim funds targeted for this, and then $486,000 for statewide evaluation purposes. So with that, each of the individual staff, and I'll do my best to keep up with them with the PowerPoint, we'll walk through the individual counties. And Chairwoman Williamson, since you decided to do that at the end, we can adjust on that because we defer to the committee on what they'd like to do, but we've staged it so that we can put our recommendation on each county as we go.
No, that's great.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, we'll start with Coos.
So this format that you'll see here is going to be the same.
Say Mike. Excellent. Thank you.
That's what I'm here for.
This format that you will see for Coos County will be the same for all 15 of the counties. We'll start out with a funding overview slide similar to this, which is the same as what you have on the staff recommendation sheet that we provided within your packets. So I'm not going to cover those numbers, but you can just see there will only be a couple areas where there will be I think actually only one county where there will be a deviation from what's in your packet on this. This is a snapshot of a zoomed in snapshot of the southern region that has the same information as your large graph. So Coos County is circled here, but it's compared to the counties that are surrounding it and in the near areas. So Coos County only has one program. It's a new program. They're focusing on downward departures and optional probations for those offenders who are qualified based on their sentencing grid. So it's post-sentence risk assessment through the LSCMI, and the DA has gone into agreement with the county or with whomever it is that they go into agreement with, it's not specific in there, to consider more offenders that are eligible for downward departures or optional probation based on their sentencing guideline grid. Those that are accepted will be put into the specialized program that will have supervision, interventions, sanctions, and programming that's based on risk, need, and responsivity, so evidence-based supervision. And they have also moved away from a zero tolerance for revocations to up to 4 revocations of minor infractions. The list is in your packet, and I also have a couple of examples as well. They did meet all 4 of the goals with this one program, and we went back out and asked additional information about including risk assessment pre-sentencing for the sentencing decisions, and they're not comfortable with that at this time, but they have had discussions about it, so it's definitely something that's in discussion, and they may consider it at another time, is what we were told. For the victims 10%, you can see the breakdown. For the Women's Safety and Resource Center, they will be funding the crisis response team, as well as transportation to the courthouses to file restraining orders. Because Coos County and the coast is such a large area, transportation is one of those barriers that they often face. And for the Kids Hope Center, they will be funding operating expenses that will include subsidizing salaries, utilities, office supplies, security, and other communication needs. And with that, we have made the recommendation as a staff to approve the program narrative, and then we had the Victims Advisory Panel also go through approving. Happy to answer any questions that you might have about this application, or that our panel might be able to address.
Well, I'll probably have this question for everybody, which is, as staff, what are the areas that we should be watching
Right.
In this county, and what are areas of concern? Based on what you know, since you're the expert on the county and worked most closely with them, where are areas that we should pay special attention to?
Do you want to address how we might answer that question going forward? Because I'm not exactly clear what kind of information we might want.
So we asked Kelly, officer back here, to have each county's breakdown of, especially on the prison resources, is it revocations, is it intakes, is it length of stay, on that side of things. We did do a recidivism analysis on county by county. It's challenging in smaller counties with smaller numbers. The analysis really jumps quite substantially, and so you need to take that for what it's worth. But so Kelly has that information in terms of the prison usage. So if you're interested in how Coos County has done with intakes and things like that, we have that information. Is that kind of what you're asking for?
I think my question was more generic than that, which is, these are specific programs to this county. And so are there any, highlights or areas of concern, might be too strong a word, but places to watch as this county develops their individual programs? So it's not necessary, it's more, I think, more nuanced than that. Because I know we'll get the numbers from you guys, but do you think the transportation program is great, but it hasn't been tried before, and so there may be concerns about whether or not it's utilized at the level that we think it should be, or so it's much more of that sort of analysis on these programs than whether or not we think they can hit their target.
So
and you can say no, that there isn't
Okay.
any. I mean, that's fine. If you don't have any areas that you think we should keep a special eye on, then that's totally fine too.
Okay. In regards to the specific transportation that you brought up, I think that the victim services experts know that that's a huge barrier in some of these more rural counties, and so I think that funding the transportation will help them dramatically. So as far as that goes specifically, no. Regarding their program, I feel like it's important on any new program to really focus on the implementation and do what you say you're going to do, and because you can create a great plan and a great itemized list of all the things you want to do, but if you don't actually follow through with it and deal with it, I think that would be the main focus of how we'll be watching this program unfold going forward for any new program. But does anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
And not all programs, when you do them and you put them out, actually meet the objective that they could start out with. And I think that's what what she's talking about. So are you going to watch? Because sometimes modifications are required because you encounter some things that you didn't think about when you start program. And then on the flip side, sometimes we look at programs and we don't tweak them or modify them, and we're not getting the results that we need, or they may not be of value at all. So I think that's what you're trying to get, what kind of oversight and what we're going to do to make certain that at the end, and we talk in terms of program, but at the end, are we meeting the objective that we want, and that's the outcome?
I think I can answer some of that question, Senator, which is we are approving a 2-year grant,
Right.
but they're only getting 1 year's worth of money. So before that second payment is paid out, it's my hope that we are the ones that see that midway point and recommend to the CJC whether or not something needs to be altered before that second payment goes out. It's kind of a midway point check-in.
But if you're not doing the oversight, you're not
Right,
gonna
right.
know what to alter.
Yeah.
So, and I'll let Ben chime in on this too, but one of the great things about the way we've set this up is each of our grants analysts really has the county and building the relationship and working with them. And so I think there's going to be a lot of talking between our office and how are things going. Obviously, there are numbers that are easier for us to monitor, and then there are things that are more challenging. And so I think we're establishing those and building those relationships now. But we're just going to have one person really kind of be the point on a county to kind of build those relationships.
And I would say not just for Coos, but for a lot of these counties where you have programming that's really strong, one of the things that we as individual grant folks are going to be paying attention to is if folks are getting to that programming. And then if you have folks that, a way of getting folks to programming, do you have strong programming for them to get to? So I hope that answers some of that question. There's a lot of these counties that may be stronger in one or the other. And then what we're going to do is watch to make sure that those two things meet. I hope that answers that question a little bit. And we're going to be very active in that.
I'd just like to make another comment in terms of what we have in structure in place. So during that year time frame of the first disbursement of funds, they'll report twice on these outcomes and outputs. We'll also have the RIC data quarterly, and then we'll have the ongoing exchanges between our staff and their program staff. So that's the structure in which we'll monitor.
Okay.
And I think just to call attention to the outcomes and outputs that Paul mentioned, you'll see in your program narratives that the county's really told us, all right, this is how many people we think we can serve. And so we'll be checking in with them on how are they, is the funding getting, like Ben said, to the people who they thought it would? Are there as many people in there? And what results are you getting on a kind of programmatic level? But we really ask the counties to tell us what are the measurements and what are your objectives that you're going to do with this specific program.
And to that note, also, when we sent out approval, or not approval, but advancement to the Grant Review Committee emails, Kelly and Ann, our data and research team, had done some work on suggested outputs and outcomes that could come forward as being a positive way to do some tracking in the counties based on their programming. So we sent that out to all of the counties. We then received emails back saying thank you for those ideas. It was, they were really helpful. They were really great. Some counties do a great job and know what they need to track and track more than what we would ask for, but it's great that they have more than that information. And then one other note on this county specifically, so for Coos County, they did say that they would be considering more downward departures for this program for the offenders that qualify based on the sentencing grid. So I think anytime that we see the word consider in any grant application, it's something to make note of and kind of keep an eye on, because considering is not saying yes, we'll do it, or no, we won't. It's just we'll think about it and we'll get back to you on how it's working. So to me, that would be the one strong point that I would kind of pay attention to as we move forward.
Great, thank you.
As far as, I think just one other thing to add as far as the outcomes and outputs is that we have a lot of counties that are doing similar things. Like we have a lot of counties that are doing housing. And so Kelly and Anna put together kind of like a stock outcome and output for housing, so that when we look at the various counties, if they're able to track similar numbers, we should be able to kind of compare to each other and hopefully see what's working and why. And so hopefully going forward, that'll help us to kind of understand why housing's maybe working in one county better than another, and we can try to replicate that and make it more effective.
Great.
Next county.
Next county.
All right. Next up, we have Crook County, and they have a total of 3 programs. So here's our their prison use, as you can tell, has been down in the last year. And their first program is a parole and probation officer / support mentor. So what they want to do with this is they basically want to reduce their caseloads, be able to supervise more people safely and effectively in the community. And I think a noteworthy thing from their application is that they point out that they want this to people on downward departures and people that are released on short-term trans leave. So that both of those kind of get right at prison use, which is good and will hopefully be effective. They also say in their application that they're going to try to have that position, the PO / support mentor, work on housing and employment to the extent that they can. They're not buying more housing, but they're going to try to, I think in their application they said something about, we have motels that we rent out for people. The motels are getting a little tired of having people get out of prison and stay there on short-term trans leave. So they're going to try to kind of repair those relationships, maybe supervise those people more intensively so that they are able to maximize short-term trans leave to the extent they can. And they also, we reached out to them a little bit more because we wanted to get kind of a clear answer from their application, or a clear answer than what they put in their application about whether or not the DA was on board and was willing to consider downward departures, and we understand that they are. So that's a positive thing. So that's their first program. The second is the MRT treatment. So this is something that is an ongoing program. It's already started. And they're going to be giving this treatment to folks while they're in custody, while they have kind of a captive audience, and the people have some clean and sober time. They think that'll make it more effective. And they partner with Lutheran Community Services on that. And their third program is their sanctioned jail beds. So a problem they've been having there is that they've had, I think, only 16 jail beds in their county. They rent some additional ones from Jefferson County. When they have people especially participating in drug court, who they want to give a short sanction to, maybe a day or two in jail, they have not had the jail space, and they've had to matrix out a lot of people. So, in order for a drug court to work, you have to give swift and sure sanctions, and so this is something that will allow them to do that more effectively. So overall, just kind of anticipating your question from the last application for these three, without the victims part yet. I think these get to kind of, they're not an extremely high prison county, but they get to some of the points, some of the things we'd hope that we would see in an application. It seems like people are kind of on board and they're directing their efforts in a good way. So seems like a good application. The victims piece. So this is one that our victims panel had a little trouble with. They don't think it was best practice what was actually submitted in the application. And so we reached out to Crook County and also to the Kids Center. And one of the benefits of our victims panel is that they know pretty much every program in the state, and they know what they're doing, they know how they're spending their money, and they very much like this program and their current activities, and they want to fund that. They just didn't want to fund exactly what they'd written in their application. So Kids Center has said that they are going to change what they're funding with this money, and they're going to go along with what the victims panel wants. So we feel good about that, and the victims panel felt good about it. So I think on our next slide, that's why we have changes required. But we should have more, I believe by Thursday, we should have kind of the final version of what they're actually going to do with the money. But they've already spoken to our victims panel and agreed that they'll do what they want them to do.
So if we approve this today, the assumption is we'll be approving it with the changes as
Right.
suggested by the victims panel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Questions?
I just have a question that's kind of an overall question. As you guys look through the applications, did you look at how functional the local public safety coordinating councils are and what their role is going to be as we roll this out? I know, as we talked about before, how are we going to monitor that? That's really at the local level, I would think, the body that's going to help us as a state move forward. And I just wonder how folks answer the local public safety coordinating council question.
I'll let Ben respond. We actually had right on point with an interaction with Curry County that we've kind of worked with them. Ben, you want to talk about Curry?
I thought it was a really healthy interaction and a great use of the CJC. Curry County contacted us and said that they were really wanting to establish a very functional and a comprehensive and effective, LPSC. And so what we've done is we talked back and forth with them, and they were willing to have a mentor county come in, and we found a county that has a very well-functioning LPSC that's very involved and really has that kind of communication we're looking for in terms of increasing community safety or public safety. And so they are paired up now, and they are going to help them put together that LIPSIC. So I think that kind of gets at the heart of it. We are paying attention to it, but also the counties in having to put together these applications, I think, had to pay attention to that because we really required there to be some collaboration with the public safety piece, and that Curry County piece is illustrative of that.
So it's definitely something that we're paying attention to. We were really happy that Curry reached out to us and asked for this assistance. We paired them up with Yamhill County, which has a high-functioning LIPSIC, and so they're gonna work together to help build back a LIPSIC in Curry County. But I think overall, it's definitely something. It's challenging, obviously, for us to really know how often a LIPSIC meets in all 36 counties and how high-functioning it is. But I'll say that, Ross has been out and being invited to different LIPSIC meetings and given presentations. I've been doing the same thing. So there have been a lot of LIPSICs that are reaching out to us for that kind of information. And if there are any tuned in online, we are available to come down. We have a Prius, we'll travel. And we will go and give the presentation and tailor it to your county specifically, and we're happy to do that. So I think it is something that this process has actually kind of brought some counties back together that maybe weren't doing that before, and we're trying to be as helpful to that as we can.
All right,
Next one.
next one.
So speaking of Curry County, we'll move right into that. Curry County is another low prison usage county, but they are in the red, so that could be from various things. They are proposing one new program. It's Thinking for Change. Parole and Probation will be partnering with the local community health to provide addiction and mental health services to support evidence-based Thinking for Change program. These participants will be randomly selected after they are identified as medium to high risk. After they are identified as that and selected randomly, they will be going through the Thinking for Change interview process to establish eligibility. And then also, if they are eligible for the program, they will receive additional case management services for addictions, mental health, things such as that. This will be a 6-month pilot program in Gold Beach, and after 6 months, they will open up another program in Brookings as well. Gold Beach is where their jail is, so that makes sense to start it there. And the funds will cover approximately 25% of the participants. They anticipate that 75% will be covered by the Oregon Health Plan, and then the remainder, the gap, can be covered by our grant. The Oasis Shelter is their victims program. They are the only emergency shelter within 150 miles. So Crescent City, California to Coos Bay, this is your only option. So again, transportation is very important. Transitional housing, household items, all of those things will be covered by this $23,000 that they're proposing that they give to victim services. And with that, we've recommended approval, as has the Victim Services, or the Victims Advisory Panel.
Questions?
There may be an update on the randomization aspect of the application in terms of what we want to pay attention to going forward. Ben, don't we have an update on this particular county as you talk to them about what they had proposed to do versus what in reality?
For Curry County? I don't know that it was Curry.
I
Yeah,
think
so-
they essentially are backing off of this randomization approach. I think
Oh,
in the,
I'm sorry.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, so I had reached out to Curry. I had forgotten because it was it was a phone conversation rather than an email. So they had put a couple pieces in here about they were going to randomize, they were going to have one group getting the Thinking for Change in one location versus another one. We think that possibly that was just a little bit of they were just putting a little extra work that they really didn't have to do. So I got on the phone with them and said, you're not obligated to set up a study to do randomization. And I explained just how rigorous and intense that whole process is. And I think they found that to be quite a relief. And the discussion ended with them saying that they were going to take whatever funds were going to be used to help make that happen, and whatever resources were going to be allocated towards what they consider to be a control group are all going to be lumped into people getting what's described here in the program. So that way there's not going to be somebody getting something different. Everybody's going to be getting what you see here. So thank you for reminding me of that. I didn't have it written down.
Quick question. Maybe I missed it. Who's providing the services? Is it parole and probation, or is it a community nonprofit?
It's Curry County Community Health.
Community health?
Yeah.
Okay, so a public body.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right.
Douglas County. Douglas County is requesting the full amount. So their formula is $1,601,000. Of course, we want to show them the graph first. There they are. Their program funding request is $1,553,804. Victims 10%, $160. And they remitted their 3% to CJC. So Douglas County has several different program pieces, but it's really, it's very integrated and it's all part of the same thing. So keep that in mind as we're looking at these. The first one is the Douglas County Jail in-custody treatment beds. And what this application is all about is the integration of an already existing residential substance abuse treatment program and combining that with the Douglas County Adult Drug Court. So each of these pieces you're going to see has a little something to do with that. This first piece is 3 full-time sheriff's deputies. And what they're going to do is they're going to oversee 9 additional residential treatment beds inside the jail, which is going to make their total number 18. So currently they have 9, so it's going to double that capacity. Program 2, Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Liaison and Release Assistance Officer. This is a dual position for 1 FTE. So half the position is a liaison, which will be a central point of contact for RSAT, between RSAT and the treatment provider. The second piece is a Release Assistance Officer, which will help with bringing jail populations back to a manageable level. They lost that resource at some point. I think you read that in the application, and that's created a large population in their jail, and it's really straining staff.
Dan, will you tell them what the acronym for RSAT means?
Residential Substance Abuse Treatment. Yeah.
It's a federal grant that we received that gives grant.
And it's been functioning for a long time, and we've actually had a chance to go down and do site visits on that, and we've also done a peer review of their drug court, which I'll get to in a moment. Okay. The third piece of the program is RSAT and specialty court participants. This piece right here reduces prison intakes by reducing the number of offenders sentenced on technical violations. I feel like this really is in line with the spirit of 3194. This shows excellent collaboration, and what it funds is a 0.5 FTE of a district attorney, and it increases their capacity to review RSAT referrals and work in conjunction with parole and probation. Program number 4, RSAT Alcohol and Drug Treatment Services. So this is ADAPT, the treatment provider. I actually do not know what ADAPT stands for, so we'll just call it ADAPT. And what it does is it allows them to be able to provide treatment for the 9 beds, and then also a minimum of 45 weeks of drug court outpatient. So that's where you get that residential substance abuse treatment, and then folks transitioning into the adult drug court. They're really making those two work together. And nationally, that's something that's talked about is how to make those two work in conjunction to get better results in transition. Get to the victims 10%. The battered persons advocacy. comprehensive services to victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking. And then Douglas Cares is the second victims piece that's going to be funded here. I have to say that we reached out and asked them specifically if this was available to anyone in the community, because there is a lot of this that touches on the system, and there was a lot of system talk in there. But we reached out, and they assured us that this is available regardless of your involvement in the legal system. And the panel heard that, and if we get to the next page, you'll see the results. So staff is suggesting, or is recommending approval of the programs piece, and the panel is recommending approval of the victims 10% piece.
Ben, what was the average length of stay for people in the jail treatment program? I didn't see it, but it's.
So they've changed that. It was, I think, and I'm just kind of guessing at this, but in general, it was like 6 months for the residential substance abuse treatment program. That is going to be reduced with this, because now they have this transition into the adult drug court. So they're actually looking to serve more in custody and then get them out sooner. So I've seen that plan. I feel like, I don't want to put it in stone here, but it's something like a 6-month reduction down to a 3-month reduction. So it's quite a bit.
Question on, are you going to monitor that, since that's quite a reduction? I mean, when you go from 6 months to 3 months.
Absolutely. And so I'm pretty involved with residential substance abuse treatment anyway. I'm the grant coordinator for that grant, and I'm the grant coordinator for their adult drug court grant. And now that the two are combining with the 3194 piece, I think it stands to reason that I'll be very involved in that. And they've already sent out some great emails asking questions about things with their drug court, and I anticipate more. So hopefully they utilize CJC, and yeah, we are going to be really involved. And I just went to a national conference on both RSAT and drug court, so we're staying pretty knowledgeable.
Is that a part of the best practice model?
The residential substance abuse?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the length of time that you're in residence, because that's always been debated as to what is, quote, the length of time, the reasonable length of time.
At the last conference I went to, the residential substance abuse treatment folks do not have best practice standards published. They do not have that. They're actually currently thinking about developing those. And so I think what you've got is you've got a lot of promising practices. You've got a lot of people doing different things across the United States. And when I did a site visit of this program, they seem to have a very thoughtful structure. And so I think it remains to be seen. And they are also going to be doing some evaluation of this program.
Next, I guess. I guess we move on to the next one.
I guess so.
Next county? Next county? All right, next up we have grants formula amount is $100,000 total.
This one of those counties getting the minimum. So
Right.
This is our minimum grant.
And then they as well are pretty small on prison use. And they have a total of 3 programs as well as their victims 10%. Their first program is a community service supervisor and treatment coordinator. So this is going to be someone who supervises people that are ordered to do community service as part of their probation, and also provides MRT and other cognitive behavioral therapy and programs. This is an ongoing position. I think it was a part-time position with their funding from last time, so they're going to expand it into a full-time position. Their next program is a restitution advocate that will work out of the DA's office. So they'll assist victims with the restitution process. You can develop their forms and submit their paperwork so that judges can get restitution orders on cases. And then their third program is for transitional housing. So they're going to rent an apartment and provide temporary housing. They're also going to have food and clothing as needed. And there's going to be access to treatment, life skills, kind of job training, stuff like that, to try to get people sort of up on their feet and, you know, working and taking care of themselves so they don't need this apartment for very long. So the
Are
first
there
two-
jobs in Grant County? I just had to move.
Hopefully. And it will be put in a sober setting as well. So the first two are kind of more about holding people accountable, restitution, and community service. And then the last one will hopefully be able to beef up short-term trans leave because they won't turn people down for not having a place to go. Let's see. So they're 10% for the victims, $10,000 in this case. This is one that our victims panel also pushed back on a little bit. The Heart of Grant County does a fun run event every year and they give out a lot of stuff with, I think, phone numbers and ways to access services for crime victims. And so they were going to spend a lot of money on sort of their giveaway stuff, a lot of the materials that they give out. And our victims panel kind of wanted to see that go into more direct service. And so we contacted them. I think Ben actually spoke to them. And they've agreed that they'll put all the money that they get out of this into their direct services, and other money will take care of the other stuff. But I guess the fun run event is, Ben can talk about this more if you want to hear more, but that is kind of their biggest outreach event that they do every year.
And come to find out, when I spoke to the person that was putting that on, the director of the agency, she had misunderstood and really just thought that it was for anything across the board. And she was actually quite relieved and happy to transition that all into service stuff. I mean, it was quite an expense, $6,000 for 2 years worth of the fun run activity, paint, handouts, things like that. And they're going to do it anyway. It's going to get done anyway. It has plenty of other funding. And so they were very happy to make that reallocation.
We're at Jackson.
All right.
Any questions about Grant at all?
That's a tiny one.
Yeah, and their biggest program costs $57,000, so there's not a ton they can really buy, I guess, with that.
And I will say by the time we get to Klamath, after Klamath, we can take a break because that's midway through. So everyone can look forward to that.
That's Kiki.
Excuse me. Do you want me to?
No.
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 I don't remember having them be like
We
that.
might have some
You might have
profound
some
questions.
You might have to answer some questions. Okay.
So, so the numbers on here are inaccurate.
On the slide.
Yes, they are.
Is it
And-
2.1?
And I am not sure. No, they're inaccurate on my paper as well. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that.
So are
So
they accurate
yeah,
numbers?
are
Are
they
they accurate
accurate
in what
here?
we have?
That's what the formula amount is.
2.1?
I believe they're switched. I believe the formula amount is the $2,049,000.
Well, that's not what we have here. Oh.
So what I may have to do is come back to you with that because I just noticed that
Well,
these are.
the funding request is $2,049,000.
That's correct. It's the formula amount that's off, and the formula amount
Backwards?
for Jackson
Funding amount.
is
Funding
$2,112,766.
Right.
So it's right on our paper.
It's right on our
your
paper. Okay.
It's
Okay,
just
great.
The top number formula amount is incorrect, but the rest of the numbers are fine.
Apologies for that. Brad? You want to say anything about that, Ross? All right. Jackson County's first program, $227,600, is a jail treatment pod. Jackson County's had jail treatment for quite some time. This is going to provide a minimum of 20 hours of evidence-based treatment to folks in the community corrections, using the community corrections curriculum. What stands out about this program, and this is in custody, of course, what stands out about it is that it's gender-specific delivery. So they will be serving men and women. Okay. And this $227,600 goes to fund 2 full-time substance abuse treatment counselors. Program number 2 is a day reporting and management center. This is going to provide employment resources, drug and alcohol compliance, UAs, et cetera, enhanced day reporting, finance, budgeting, everything you'd expect from a day reporting center. And it's intended to divert offenders from jail into a community alternative. For that, they're asking $162,710, and that hires one full-time program specialist.
Is that a new program? Or is it in addition to a day program that already exists? Well, that's what I was wondering. Like, that's a pretty inexpensive program. If that's,
They're just adding an FTE, Ben.
Yeah, I think they're just adding to this. Yeah,
yeah, okay.
yeah. Okay. Program number 3, District Attorney Victims Witness Program. This is actually an example of a system-based victim service. This is something we would not have expected to see, and the victims panel would not have wanted to see this come across their desk, but we are very pleased to see this, of course, come across as part of the program piece of an application. They're going to hire one full-time program specialist and provide a variety of services to victims of crimes and assist with the prosecution of offenders. Jackson County program number 4 is the Release Assistance Officer. This is going to help feed that day reporting and management center. So that's really what this does. And we reached out, CJC reached out and asked if we expected these program components as a whole to lead to the DA and court negotiating more downward departures. We felt like that was an important question because this goes to what I said earlier. If you have programming, that's great. Is there a mechanism for getting more and more people to utilize that programming? And they said, yes, the proposed programming adds options and resources that should eliminate or bridge existing gaps in services, and that's going to give great confidence to the courts and the district attorney's office. Program number 5, this is the Transitional Care Program. So this is going to move a transitional care program or implement a transitional care program in their community justice center. And it's going to have a program manager, alcohol and drug specialist, and 3 substance abuse case managers. And there's also going to be some utilities for housing stuff also provided in this. And an indigent discretionary fund, so for things like fees, if they need to get DMV ID, Medicaid, medical assistance, copay stuff. So that's all going to be covered in this. And it connects clients, and corrections clients will have access to residential treatment programs that also focus on employment and sustainable housing upon program completion. So this speaks to that piece about getting them the housing and employment during the transition phase. The victims 10% piece, Children's Advocacy Center provides a multidisciplinary approach to investigation, intervention, prosecution, and prevention of child abuse. This is open to folks regardless of whether or not they're involved with the criminal justice system. Lethality Assessment Program. This actually had a lot of interest, and if anybody else here has had any more communication about this, it's worth mentioning here. It's an easy and effective method for law enforcement and others to identify victims of domestic violence who are at risk of being seriously injured or even possibly killed by their intimate partners. And what it does is it immediately connects them with Community Works, which is the name of the agency, Domestic Violence Advocates.
And is this actually a tool that they're using? Is it like the ODARA?
That's what I was going to get.
Okay.
The Victim Services Panel, when we sent something back to them, they thought it was very important to point out that the lethality assessment should not be the sole resource for determining whether or not the victim was actually a victim or not. The assessment score should not substitute for actual conversation and listening to the victim. So we pointed that out to them specifically from the panel.
So this happens after, this tool is used after they've identified someone as a victim of domestic violence?
Correct.
And the officers will be trained in the ODARA? Is that?
I don't have that information.
Although our victim panel did point out that that was the key, is to be well trained in this so that you didn't exclude folks. You didn't use it as a single criteria to get them services. So they pointed out those items which we'll pay attention to because of this grant.
And it sounded like it was going to be a little bit of a rollout, because initially they talked about how law enforcement was going to interact with folks in this, and then eventually it was going to also be hospitals and other community services, so other members of the community. I don't think they actually said services. But so I think they're going to expand it over time, so we could always ask for that specifically, who gets trained, how do they get trained. But it sounds like they're planning on rolling it out once they get it to where folks are utilizing it properly.
And in response to your question about training, they did indicate in their application that a representative from law enforcement advocacy in the DA's office and corrections as well have been trained and are implementing the MNADV, Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence Lethality Assessment Program, into all law enforcement. So they do have trained people in all of those areas.
And to go back, Tiffany found another part to answer an earlier question. The Day Reporting Center actually was previously closed due to budgetary restraints. So this will allow them to reopen a program that they had by adding that FTE back. So it is kind of funding the entire program.
Okay, that brings us to total request, $2,049,383. And the program is recommended for approval by CJC, and then the victims panel recommended that section 2 for approval.
Great. Questions about Jackson County? All right. Josephine.
I think Jefferson.
Jefferson?
Josephine County, all these
Oh,
numbers are
Josephine.
accurate.
We're skipping Jefferson.
They don't have it.
They don't have it.
Oh, well, they're later.
Right. So funding request, $1,069,406. First program, secure treatment beds in the Josephine County Jail.
Hold on a second.
Oh,
Got their own special problems now.
yes, and actually, do you want to explain?
Yeah, so we had, when we started this process, we told, especially some of the smaller counties, if you have programs that are in danger of drying up because you're not gonna get your money at the beginning of the biennium and you need gap funding, we don't want anything to shut down that's already underway. So we put that message out there. Josephine County is the only county that came back to us and said that they really needed gap funding. And so a couple of their programs, which you'll hear about in a second, we've given them $150,000 to keep those going until they get the rest of their justice reinvestment funds. So our initial idea was, if we do the early deadline and then the later deadline for the grants, hopefully that will cover everybody and people can kind of float, but some of the more rural counties have not been able to do that, and Josephine County needed the money in advance.
Josephine still has not passed their levy, is that correct?
Yeah,
I think so.
They have not.
And just
Tried, but they have not.
to add to what Ross said, procedurally, the way that we did that is we went to our commissioners and convened a special meeting just to have the commissioners vote on advancing $150,000 of this money to Josephine, just for the purposes of not losing programming that was in existence. So our commissioners voted on that, and we got that money to them as soon as we could.
There's our graph. So, secure treatment beds in the Josephine County Jail. What this $497,000 goes to fund is actually 2 corrections deputies and a control room technician to support the facility that these people will be receiving their treatment in, a separate cell block treatment pod.
And actually, Mike and I got to go down to Josephine County last week, 2 weeks ago, and we got to go look at the secure treatment beds. Previously, they were renting beds from another county, so now they get to have it in-house. This allows people to stay in treatment and not be interrupted when they're serving sanctions. And so Nate, the community corrections director, was showing us around, and we got to see their operation there, and it was really impressive. They're doing a lot of really good stuff, so it was nice to see that we were able to get them the funds early and that helped them out.
And if you're wondering about the funding for the treatment piece in this, it's going to be provided by Josephine County adult and drug court counselors that are going to be deployed through community corrections. And that's not part of this money right here. Okay, Josephine County Program 2, Drug Court Coordinator. So this court was peer reviewed in 2015. Their previous coordinator just vacated the position. They're going to be bringing in someone new. I'm pretty sure that CJC is going to have a lot of contact with that person, as we already hold the grant for that drug court. And the court has a history of strong compliance with the 10 key components and strong compliance with our draft of the Oregon drug court standards. And feel free to ask me any questions if you're curious about what a drug court coordinator does, but they described it in great detail here in their application, so I wasn't gonna regurgitate all that for you.
I guess for them, looking at some of the issues that they have to deal with, whoever they have is going to be quite busy.
Yes, yes. Josephine County Program number 3, prosecution of non-person property crimes and drug offenders. This is to increase the capacity of the DA's office to collaborate with community corrections. I think this once again speaks to that piece of, if you have programming, how do you make sure you get folks into that programming? And that's what this piece illustrates to me.
Yeah, we got a chance to speak to the district attorney down there as well on the same trip, and he seems very on board. It sounds like he and the community corrections director have a pretty good working relationship. They're both fairly new to their positions, but they're very on board with this, and are going to consider how they can safely supervise people in the community using all these things at their disposal.
Specifically, how is that going to work?
Right.
How will that operate?
It's going to be more people considered for downward departures, especially to their drug court, I think. I think that's the way they're going to go. They kind of had one up and running, but it wasn't as flush as they would like.
So we talked to Ryan Mulkins, the DA down there, and said, specifically how's this going to work? And what he's going to do, and we kind of referred him to a few counties that do this, but essentially he's going to talk to their community corrections director, Nate, and ask Nate's opinion about, okay, is this a good candidate for supervision, and what would supervision look like if we were going to do it? What programs do we have that would address this specific person's needs? And then, so he'll have that information as his deputies make decisions on what kind of offer to make. And then with that information, they're going to utilize, like Ross said, their drug court. They have a very robust mental health court, or whether or not to even consider the jail with the residential bed piece in the jail as an option in lieu of incarceration. So really, I think it's going to be talking about how they share information, and I think they're still kind of working that out in terms of that communication line, but that's what their plan is.
And
So will it be upfront risk assessment then? The risk assessment piece itself will be completed?
That's what they're looking at. Yeah, that's what Nate was specifically talking about, is what kind of a risk assessment he could run. Also, obviously, looking at history of a person if they've been previously on supervision, and adding that to the recommendation.
And one other thing about this collaboration that I think is important to note, and we've seen it in a couple different applications, is the piece about collaborating on responses to participant behavior, which I think goes to not having some of those technical violations resulting in a revocation and folks immediately going back to prison or having to serve their sentence. So I didn't want to miss that in here.
Yeah.
Program number 4. Transitional housing, housing case management, barrier removal, basically everything that comes along with transitional housing. And Ross spoke earlier about how Kelly and Ann are putting together some outcomes and outputs associated with that, because I think there are best practices associated with running some transitional housing. And so we'll be in communication with Josephine County about those.
I think they've selected and are buying a house there that they've used in the past, that they've rented in the past, that they're now buying from the owner. So that'll increase their capacity a little bit, or at least keep it more stable.
Mental health services is program number 5. So this is 10 hours per week of mental health specialist. They specifically said an LPC, so somebody who's licensed and somebody who's going to be in the jail providing those services. They were pretty detailed about it. They provide the mental health screening. They do linkage and advocacy and referral and resource acquisition. So it's my hope, and as I read this, it seemed like they're going to do a pretty decent job of connecting them to mental health resources outside of the jail. So I think that's that's an important piece if anybody's familiar with mental health and the jail system. All right, the victim's 10%. Women's crisis support team, 24-hour a day, 7-day a week crisis line, consultation about issues related to domestic violence, sexual violence. And a safe shelter for women and children. Illinois Valley Safe House Alliance, short-term hotel stays, advocacy, protective orders, crime victim compensation, and relocation assistance. Our victims panel reviewed these, didn't really have any concerns, and if you want to click to the next slide. We recommended approval on the first piece, and the victims panel recommended approval on section 2.
Is there already a crisis line, or is this creating a new one?
If I remember right, this was already there.
Sure. I thought it was already there, yeah.
Yeah. My recollection is that this is already in place.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I just couldn't find it. All right, questions? All right.
Are we going to take a break now or after?
Or after Key Falls?
We can do either. What do you
So,
think?
well, I actually just kind of had a general question I wanted to ask if
Sure.
after Klamath or before Klamath, depending upon that. And one is, this is 2-year funding, right?
Right.
So is this money secure in that it can't be swept in the next session? The reason I ask that is because these are a lot of staffing purchases.
This legislature cannot bind a
Bind a
future
future
Yeah,
legislature.
that's a somewhat frightening. So on the second issue,
Welcome to the legislature.
the second issue is transportation, and you know, it's hard for me to visualize these little counties where that you have a victim and you need to get them to court, or whatever, sign papers or whatever. Maybe it's a judge you're going in front of. Is there an effort to use technology to do this? We do it in our county. We have what's called the Family Justice Center now, that you can actually, instead of going to court and maybe face your victim, you can do it all, on a TV screen. The other opportunity that, generally speaking, may be true is stuff like FaceTime, where a judge could FaceTime the victim rather than having to transport them. The reason I ask that, I guess, is that I hope the goal is to use technology more rather than having a driver take people and jumping all over the county. But you also, I don't know whether these counties have, access to internet, throughout the county. But, I imagine the larger cities probably do. So could the transport, would they consider transporting to a large city to maybe in their police department and do video court arraignments? That's kind of how I visualize the future. Like doctors, they do with doctors. Why not try and get these folks to utilize that kind of service rather than transportation?
Absolutely. Well, so just recently, if it's all right if I speak to this, is we did a little talk with some of the more rural counties about teletreatment and folks being able to access service providers and anybody else where the county felt like it was appropriate to communicate over the internet. It's something that's being done nationally in different things. They're doing it for medical services. But yes, absolutely, there's technology out there. We'd hope to see some stuff in some applications about it, about folks wanting to do some teletreatment in their counties. We haven't seen anything yet. There's still a chance. But we had more in mind, some of those rural counties teaming up, maybe even potentially pooling their funds and paying some provider somewhere to have a clinician in a room that can serve 30 folks a week for the appropriate number of contact hours, but do that with video, and you can have groups and one-on-ones and you can pretty much tailor it however you want. So yeah, absolutely, the technology is there. In terms of victim services, I'm not an expert in how that would go over the internet. I think that would be something that I would look at our panel to see what they say.
Yeah, well, you know, I hope this goes on for many years to come. And I guess my goal would be that we put some perhaps pressure using funding to get people to utilize those kind of services, because they are very effective. But, you know, that's just really the question. Again, you know, if it could be swept,
Well,
that's
it
right.
wouldn't be
It wouldn't be
swept. It would
swept.
be allocated going
Yeah,
forward in the
reallocated.
next, yes, in the next budget.
Yeah, well.
The
and that-
sweeping is an entirely different thing, and that does happen.
Yeah, and what concerns me is that if the stats show that this may not be working in general, then I would think the legislature would say, well, why are we wasting money on these? You know,
That's valid.
yeah, and you know, being from a county where the DA challenged a lot of this process, makes me concerned that, you know, I don't have control over how our DA sentences people. And, you know, it would be a great communication opportunity with some of our elected officials if we had, you know, those kind of stats that say, you know, you're doing this, sending more people to jail, or prison, excuse me, when other counties are utilizing other services. And I think the value of, you know, technology could help us with that. But we need those stats so that we can sit down when we're budgeting, which is how we often control those kind of issues. When we're budgeting, we can say, well, this is what we see as a problem. And we actually did that this year.
Well,
Anyway,
Commissioner, hopefully this will be the kind of tool that we continue to have given to us by the CJC. And the philosophy around 3194 was exactly that counties could learn from each other, and we would have a process like this and then be able to replicate the programs that work. And I guess not fund the ones that don't.
Right.
So I think you are right on track as far as the way we need to be thinking about this work.
And in terms of your point, Commissioner, using technology to assist us in that effort, right now, the legislature, with the Justice Reinvestment Grants, gave CJC some money to help automate this process and get it on our website so that counties can go on and in real, almost, you know, with maybe a month lag time, see exactly what's happening in their counties. We've been doing that quarterly in person, going out to the counties, giving presentations. I know you've been there. But we want to automate that process, get it on our website so that at any time a commissioner like yourself, DA, whoever in the community wants to see that information will have access to it, and it'll be just as up to date as we can possibly make it. And I think that's in the very near future for our capability. In fact, I expect us to have that online within the next couple months.
right?
Being from a small county, we had, and I know there were discussions around the state about doing this type of counseling online. And I think a lot of the counties, and Mike Schmidt offered ideas. I think a lot of the smaller counties just had a hard time trying to figure out how is this going to work. And I think we need, a lot of the treatment providers and folks were not comfortable with the idea of not having somebody in the room to be able to actually be present and monitor and see. So I don't think anybody's closed the door to it, but I think we just want to watch and see how this is going to come out.
And it took us quite a while to actually do telemedicine in around the state and smaller counties. I mean, it took several years actually of getting there. One, it's the comfort level and how who's gonna be there with the treatment. Two, it's the equipment. There's just a lot of other, you know, Clackamas County tends to be on the forefront on a lot of things. But in smaller rural communities, it's a lot more than the concepts that we talk about here. And part of it, and we've had that with drug courts, and that is the availability of resources. You know, we tend to assume that everything is like our metropolitan area, and they're not. One of the things that in drug courts, you know, we talked about was mapping, not only to see, you know, whether you have a drug court and what have you, but what are the resources that actually help you carry out those best practices. And that's something that even with telemedicine that we went through, and we talked about doing that particular, whether it was for diabetes treatments or some of those others, because you really do, it's a lot more than that. So I do think that that's coming, that's the future. You know, it's the future in medicine in remote areas, and I think it's going to be the future looking at corrections as well. So thank you guys for leading us.
And just one more thing about the transportation piece to bring you back to your original question. While teletreatment and medical treatment may be able to be done online in the future, there's a part with victim services that also has to be considered where isolation for these victims is a huge problem. And so for the rural and frontier counties, if they're out in their house all by themselves and they're not getting any interaction with other adults, it's really important for them to get to that interaction. And one other piece is that the crisis response team and the emergency responders to these 24/7 crisis lines that they have for phone calls, they have to use either their own gas to get to the victim's house, or they have to find some resource to fund that. So that's one other piece of transportation. So it's not all court, and while I think court over FaceTime or internet or however that might be, provided the victim has it, is a fantastic way to handle some of those situations, there's other things where they really have to have transportation because there's just no other option. So helping them to get that is
And my issue really was more about the court and coordinating with various communities so that they could do that. Believe me, we could put a whole lot of money into getting people out of these situations, and I'm totally behind that, but you know, that's a tough one. I have some knowledge of someone who's had that issue, but really even getting them out isn't a solution. They still have no money, they still got no job, and it's a huge problem.
Madam Chair, but the issue that you raised with respect to, and it's not sweeping, but the continuation of funding is a valid, it should be a valid concern for all of us, because if we don't have the outcome results that are in keeping with the intent of 3194, you're correct. Particularly, I think the voices that were there that were in opposition to begin with will be loud and clear.
Yeah, and you know, whenever we look through our budget process and we provide funding for perhaps a staff, we always say, well, how long is this funding going to be there? And that is certainly a question here. And for small counties, it's a big problem. For large counties like us, you know, we're probably extending a service we already provide, or we're doing a transition center too, which is brand new, and we're funding that, and I'm sure we're going to ask for money for that. That we could do it. This makes it easier and faster. But for some of these counties where they don't have it, they're reopening the door. But you know, if you save one or two people, it's probably worth it.
Why don't we take our break? And then we'll be finished.
Great.
So, I know, it is 10:36. Why don't we take, why don't we go until quarter till? Is 10 minutes enough?
Say, where's my coffee?
I don't know. Do you need some coffee?
Never mind. Yeah.
I've had so much coffee, I can't have any more coffee. Hey, Mike, you want to get the?
National
All right, Mike's got us back on the record, so we will move to Klamath County.
And just for the record, I represent Klamath County, so I will remain silent.
Thank you. Unless we have some.
It's much appreciated, too.
Okay, Klamath County. Funding request, $1,076,857. Slightly up.
Just a tad bit.
Just a tad.
He said slightly up, I said just a tad bit.
So, this entire piece goes to one program. It goes to Klamath County Jail Treatment. This is Klamath County's, this funds 44 beds in the jail treatment pod. 0.26 FTE of mental health treatment provider. And the goals and objectives were laid out pretty clear in this application. So increasing the sentence and sanction capacity of the county jail. Once again, this can help meet that one-to-one ratio responding to behavior. It builds trust in that local resources are available to supervise these high and medium risk property offenders in the community. So hopefully that'll generate, they're optimistic in here about that generating more referrals. Increases collaboration between stakeholders and their ability to tailor conditions of supervision and services to the individual based on their multiple assessments. So those were clearly articulated in the application. There's many specific things about the program. I think it's a good demonstration of having those resources available. And this is an example, Representative Williamson, when you would ask what we, like at CJC, what we would be looking at in a county like this, what we'd be looking at is if this really does create confidence in this program and confidence in the ability for them to supervise these folks in the community. And is this generating more downward departures? Is this actually increasing utilization because these resources are available? So that is something that we would be taking a look at. The victims piece, $111,016 for Marta's House. This is this focuses on reaching out and supporting the victims of sexual abuse, rape, trafficking, intimate partner violence, dating violence, and stalking. It funds an advocate and it funds a volunteer coordinator because they have, I think, a substantial pool of volunteers, if I remember that correctly, and they need somebody to help coordinate all of that. CJC recommends approval of the overall program, and the victims panel recommends approval of the Marta's House funds.
The only thing I'd add to that analysis is we're also working with Klamath County on another grant, a federal justice reinvestment grant. And so what they're doing in Klamath County and in Lane County is building essentially a model on the 416 program that's here in Marion County that'll be specifically targeting property and drug offenders and to supervise them locally in that model. So it's kind of, there's this piece and there's that piece, and I think there would be some coordination between the two.
And we could go into great detail about what they have set up there in Klamath, but it's pretty explanatory there in the application.
Questions?
Actually, I don't have a question so much as this is certainly not innovative, but it's more funding a necessity, which is the jail beds. I assume they have them before and it was underfunded, and thanks to this grant, they get the money they need. So one of the provisions of the 3194 was innovative programs, but a lot of our counties can't even do what they have have to do before they move to innovative. So, I mean, I just wanted to comment. It'd be great if they got the funding they needed to do what they need to do, and then hopefully do something innovative in the future.
I think that connects up to your technology question a little. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
right.
But it also connects to talk about the federal grant that they get for 416. When, and that was several years ago, when we actually, some of us were hopeful that we were going to get 416 passed several years ago. And Marion County said even though we didn't pass it, they went out on their own. And so, you know, they're adding that component to theirs, which is a part of the innovation because we did not see legislatively fit to actually go forward with 416. So, but you're right, we're not going to ever all have all the money we need. Not unless we borrow some from Clackamas County. I couldn't resist
We're putting
that.
it in roads.
I think with your question about technology earlier and some of that innovation, I think we're still seeing some backfilling because it's necessary. And if this program continues in the future, hopefully we will be able to see more innovation and more, some more creative stuff as opposed to just doing what we would hope to have already been doing.
And just for the record, because in fairness to the rural counties, if we look at the economy in the state, and we think about all 36 and 6 counties, they don't all enjoy the same economy that we have in Multnomah, Clackamas, and some of the other bigger counties. And so the rural counties have let us know during session that there is in Oregon, and they talk a lot about the rural-urban divide, and that actually boils down to resources and whether or not those counties have the resources to do some of those best practices that we talk about. That's why, some of us who are looking at where are the gaps and can we actually shore up some of those gaps in services. So it's a topic that this body continues to have as we deal with the state as a whole, in recognition that all counties in the state do not enjoy the same economic output.
Yeah, but some of the innovation, I guess, is the way I'm thinking is that, Clackamas County has continually increased the money we give to community corrections. We had a brief talk. Well, if this money comes, can we put that back into the general fund? And so my concern is kind of, if I get the money from this grant and I take the money out and just use this to fill that and I get the money back. I mean, I doubt that you guys are analyzing their budgets yet. And that's some concern to me. But, when you have counties where they don't have a sheriff on the street, that's different, It makes perfect sense to fund one part and put more sheriffs out on the street. But that is not innovative. It's not even close to innovative. But, I mean, that's my concern. Clackamas County, I wouldn't let it happen. And thankfully, our chair is very strong on community corrections. And we wouldn't allow that to happen. But other counties, they may not have a choice. So.
Well, Commissioner, I would say when we funded 3194 last cycle, one of the things we did is gave specific money for jail beds. And the innovation was you need to use those jail beds differently than you do. So I think in some applications it may look like there's backfill, but the hope, and I looked at the staff for this, since you guys have been more closely looking at these applications, that the tools be used differently.
Yeah, last time you're just refunding those transitional beds or whatever beds.
No, we were buying more beds for short-term sanctions. So the money
Yeah.
that,
Yeah, that's what we did.
right.
we opened up beds in our transition center so that we could reduce the people, or get people out of jail,
Right.
prison first, faster. And some of these programs are just continuing the funding of those beds. Yeah.
And I think it's important to recognize that these beds are not just being used for short-term beds. They're being used for treatment while they're in jail. So the folks that are in these beds are getting, cognitive behavioral treatment and mental health treatment at a very intense rate to try to rehabilitate them while they're in the jail. And then, so it's providing kind of a reach-in at the same time.
Yeah, it's really making and this is my understanding of the application, it's really making these custodial sanctions more of a response. So a response to participant behavior. And not only that, and I think kind of bordering on the innovative piece here is that it's a 1-to-1 ratio between behavior and response that they're trying to achieve with their one-stop shop there, and immediately having access to those sanction beds, but also having it not be a sit and do nothing space, but a treatment space. And because crime and drugs reinforce at a 1-to-1 ratio, and I think Klamath is looking to reinforce or respond at that same ratio that drugs and crime do. That's what I saw in the application. I don't know if anybody else saw it the same way.
This is live, huh? I'm getting text messages. Somebody saying about what I said. Yeah, and it doesn't do any good if you say, well, if you break the rules, we're promising we're going to put you in beds or something in the jail, but you don't have them, and this helps fund some of those, but it's I guess it's too bad we don't fund these things that are so valuable, and that we have to look to grants to keep them open. And in Clackamas County, we try not to do that. We try to use that money for innovation. And but I know we're going to be using some of this money for those transition beds.
And I think in recognition that that not all is the same, and not all models are the same, and not all the availability of resources are the same. So when you talk innovation, what may be innovated in Clackamas County may not be the same that's in Klamath. Because, it really, the needs will vary from county to county. And I think from that standpoint, but what is the same is the expectation of what our outcomes are. I think we don't want to forget that when we did 3194, including because there was a lot of discussion about the assessment and analysis to make certain that we were, in fact, getting the outcome in order to come back to do what you said earlier. If we're not hitting the mark, then this body, these legislators, will tell us whether or not funding goes forward. So, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that all is not alike across the state, and that what may be needed in Klamath or what may be needed in Crook or Coos or Curry will vary from county to county. But at the same time, the ultimate objective is the same, regardless of whether we're talking Marion, Pope, Clackamas, or Washington counties. I mean, our expectation is that we will keep the community safe, and we will lower the bed utilization at DOC. So I just need to put that out because we are live, and individuals do listen in to what we're having to say. So at least that's my take.
I agree.
All right. Should we get to the recommendation?
We did for Klamath. So CJC recommended approval on Part 1, and the victims panel recommended approval on Part 2.
Any other questions on this application? All right. Let's move to Lane.
All right, next is Lane County. This is a big one. Their formula amount is a little over $3 million total. They have 6 total programs, not counting their victims fees. And looking at their prison use slide. So they have come down a little bit in the last year, which is why they're in the green there. But they still use a lot of prison. You can compare that to Multnomah County, which has a much bigger population, so they still use a lot of prison. Jumping into their first program. So their first program is Lane County Reentry. This is a partnership with Sponsors, which is a fantastic organization I'm sure everybody's probably familiar with. And it's actually a reach-in to DOC facilities where 3 to 6 months before release, people from Sponsors go in and they try to come up, they do an assessment, they come up with a plan, and try to have a real kind of robust wraparound for when the person is released. That involves mentoring, housing, treatment, employment, healthcare, and the list goes on. And it's all based on that assessment. Program number 2, some of these kind of overlap with each other, and I think program number 1 and number 2 overlap. And this provides funds for substance abuse and mental health treatment through Sponsors and Emergence for people that are returning to Lane County. So Paul had alluded to this at the beginning, I think. There was a batterer's intervention piece that was $130,000 in this. We had some questions as to whether or not that was a good idea, whether or not that fit within the goals of 3194, and so that part has been removed, and that's going to come back in the second deadline for your consideration. So they might retool that a little bit, but that's been removed from this point. Let's see, program number 3, this provides more evidence-based supervision. So it's just to give basically parole and probation officers more tools to work with medium and high-risk offenders. So things like carry guides, change company journals, TCU exercises, things like that. Program number 4. So this is the district attorney diversion program. So we had a lot of questions about this because with Lane County using as much prison as they did, we weren't sure when we first read their application if they were really addressing prison use head-on. They have a really high length of stay compared to the other counties. And so we reached out to Patty Perlow, who's the new DA there, and she talked about this program, and she also talked about the 416, which we discussed with other counties just a minute ago. So they are involved in the 416, and then with this program, she said that kind of their old way of dealing with repeat property offenders is they would wait until people had several cases, and then they would hammer them, and they send them off to prison for a long prison sentence. As you can imagine, it's very expensive. Their new plan is to try to deal with people as they come in, which they have not been able to do previously because of resource challenges. And they're going to offer people that aren't repeat offenders yet, they're going to offer them a diversion. So it's kind of like a drunk driving diversion that I know Multnomah County and several other counties do, where the offender would plead guilty, and then they have 6 to 9 months to pay restitution, to submit to some treatment, to go through basically kind of a miniature supervision. And if they meet all those qualifications, then their case gets dismissed. If they fail those qualifications, they've already pled guilty, they would go on supervision at that point. There's a lot of different ways that things can be charged, and prison diversion programs, we were very interested in finding out, is this going to deal with Measure 57 property offenders and drug offenders? Is this going to deal with the people that are kind of driving the prison use that we look at with 3194? And so we've had that conversation with Lane County as well as with the DA. So you can elaborate on that if you want to, but her answer was basically that this local program, the new way they're going to deal with repeat property offenders and the 416, they hope is going to make a difference. And like I said, they are in the green right now from last year, and a lot of that is because they've changed their length of stay some. So I hope that continues.
So just to chime in a little bit on that point, because we did have a lot of back and forth communication about this. This program is not diverting people who would be going to prison. This is diverting people, potentially diverting people, or giving them a chance to not have that conviction ultimately entered, who would have been probation cases anyway. The way that Lane County is saying that really gets to prison is because of the way Measure 57 is written. You can very quickly become a repeat property offender who is then prison bound. It's their hope by intervening immediately before these people have multiple cases on that very first case and kind of redirecting them and getting them on the path, that they will stop that person from becoming a repeat offender who would then go to prison. So this is different than anything we've seen in any other county. They're really trying to address this in a different way, but it's a longer-term program, and it's not an immediate drop in prison intake program. It would take time for this to have that kind of an effect.
Question, Mike, what kind of tracking are they going to put in place? I mean, that's a very much a longitudinal approach.
Yeah, you know, the good news is that tracking this type of program is would be extremely easy for both us and for them. Just looking at cases referred to their office for these types of crimes, they'll be having the entered guilty pleas, and then we'll be able to see the success rate of folks in that program. So the tracking will be, we'll see it very, very quickly. The harder part would be knowing if that person would have ever been a repeat offender or not. And because, of course, some people won't become repeat offenders and some of them would. And that's the part where, in terms of prison savings down the road, it would be harder to figure out exactly how much this ends up saving in the long run.
And are these felony offenders, I take it?
Felony offenders. So it'd be first-time felony offenders.
And would they be sentenced then to community supervision?
Yeah, they would have pled guilty, and if they don't complete their diversion successfully, then they would get community supervision.
So
So they have a chance to avoid getting the predicates that make them Measure 57 offenders, which drives up the prison.
So they wouldn't go to community corrections from the onset. There would be a diversion period where they wouldn't go to community corrections.
If they failed their diversion, and I think that it's a 6 to 9 month diversion, so they would have that amount of time. You know, if they failed sometime in there, I guess they could fail very quickly, and then they quickly go to community corrections.
But officially, I mean, Donovan's office is helping in the supervision of even that period.
Yeah.
It's not official on paper supervision because the sentence isn't entered. But they're
it's not a
working
formal
with
supervision.
community corrections in order to, even during that diversionary period.
All right, the next program is the Sherman Center Education Program, number 5. This is a partnership with Lane Community College, and it provides continuing education, GED, adult basic education, job skills, computer skills, resume building, stuff like that. And then the last, and this is a smaller slice of the pie, their 6th program, is to help them build a stronger, more collaborative LIPSIC, and also to collect data around justice reinvestment programs. So they would use this to increase staff support and to be able to track some of their programs internally. So there's a lot of overlap in a lot of these things. What our kind of questions when we looked at this application were that a lot of this is a little bit more down the road than some other way, you know, something where you consider a lot of immediate downward departures. But when we reached out to Patty Perlow, she did talk about the 416 and some other things they're doing to address prison use immediately. But a lot of these sponsors is a great program, and a lot of these do link up overall.
Do you have a projected number of the number of diversions they're looking at?
For the 416?
No, just if they're going to do that diversion on those property crimes, about what that number might look like.
Is it, okay, yeah, so Tiffany's pointing out to me, they're expecting 200 non-repeat offenders. So those are gonna be the people that kinda, you know, come in with their first felony property crime. So they think 200.
What I'm thinking about is if those aren't actually going to community supervision, community corrections is funded on per capita basis, and if those folks are completely being diverted out of the community corrections system, then those aren't going to be captured in the funding formula for community corrections through the statewide level. So I would hope they would keep that in mind, that they're not going to get that funding for basic community correction services through their grant and aid, because that population wouldn't be counted.
Yeah. And 200 is a lot of offenders, clearly. You know, if this works as like other diversion programs that I'm aware of, there's more, you go do this, then you kind of bring it back and show proof that you did it. So I'm assuming that's how they think they're going to be able to manage that many people without the additional funding from DOC for that.
Is 200 annually or biannual?
I believe it's gonna be 200 for the biennium, is my understanding. Okay. Any other questions about their program before we talk about the victims part briefly? Okay. So, they have 4 different victim services organizations, that are gonna split up the money, and, these providers are gonna serve mostly, child abuse, child sexual abuse, adult sexual abuse, and domestic violence, and their goal for this overall, these 4 programs is to help marginalized and underserved communities. That's something that they identified as a big problem in Lane County. And so turning to our last page, CJC staff recommends the program, and the victims panel recommended the victims piece.
Questions? All right. Thank you very much. Move on to Lincoln County.
So Lincoln County's formula amount is $530,000 approximately. Staff did a lot of work on this application to rehabilitate it. The initial application that we received didn't have enough details to really identify the impact that this was going to have on the 3194. So we went back to them with a lot of staff questions and had them work really hard, and they did a good job of rehabilitating that to make it more clear of what we needed to see from them, and they had already thought that through. It just didn't get written into it in a clear way. As you can see, Lincoln is a little bit up on the prison. So just for your comparison. So this is an enhancement of an existing program. They already have the Transition and Programming Services program at Lincoln County. They refer to it as TAPS. They're going to expand what they have now to include reach-ins, and the transition PO will actually hold on to this caseload of people that they're case planning for while they're in custody for a period of 6 months, and then they will work with the regular caseload POs to transition them into that regular caseload. So that's a good thing, because it will help to ensure that they get the employment and the housing and the treatment that they are already set up to do. Just that smoother transition, I would assume that that makes anything easier, as it does in many cases. They're also doing a long-term lease for housing. It will increase their beds by approximately 20. And in these, they're not just giving them a bed to live in. They are including the wraparound services that would go with that. So addictions treatment if they need it, mental health treatment if they need it, anger management, whatever that might be. They're expanding that to include all of those things, and that will be for the male and female population, so that they can divvy up the beds that they already have to incorporate more female beds, and then this new service will provide 20 additional. This will increase the DA's willingness to offer more downward departures, is what they've indicated. They'll be able to supervise them in a more evidence-based way with the additional POs that they're asking for the regular caseload. And they will also be able to offer or accept more short-term trans leave, because they will have a place for these folks to go for a period of a month while they're able to secure housing through this transition position. So that's the summary of this program. And then we move into the victims. 10%, they've decided to split this evenly between the 2 programs. One is obviously for children, and it's for children that are victims of any type of crime. So if it's trauma or abuse and neglect, sexual abuse, any of those things, they're expanding the hours for their 2 part-time counselors to increase those hours, as well as hiring an additional 3rd counselor that would be able to do some additional part-time hours to help offer different time slots for different people, so that they have more of a variety. And then for My Sister's Place, that's really to subsidize the emergency shelter that's there in Lincoln County. So they will provide additional housing beds, or help fund that, I'm sorry, and then also provide services and costs, so direct services. Staff recommended approval, and the victims panel also recommended approval for that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Lynn County. So Lynn County's funding request is $1,464,377. They are up. So there's actually, I reached out to Lynn on a couple different things, got some feedback. First, we'll talk about their CIP program, their community intervention program, providing mental health services to those in jail, community supports to those on probation. When I read you some of the FTEs, I think you'll see how that falls into place. Access to a recovery mentor, and intensive supports to drug court participants. So as Paul mentioned earlier, there was $14,000, and I'll just get this out of the way, $14,000 allocated to an 8th grade program, which we thought sounded really nice. However, it just didn't fit 3194, and they really received that feedback really well and decided to reallocate those funds to this CIP program and to the prison reentry program, which I'll talk about next. So we even got back to them and had them fill out additional portions of the application, and they did that very promptly. So I think they responded really well, which also goes to how the communication's going to go in the future. We've always had a good communication with Lynn County, and that just continued here with this application process.
So is it that request for the 8th grade transition program, why it received an approval with concerns?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the one. Is that still in there? Is it
Yeah.
still
Well,
labeled
it's
as
in
that?
our paper. It's
It's
in
in
our
our
paperwork.
Okay, it may be in your paper, but I think it's going to be different in our slides. So
Great.
that's all changed. And we received all those new budgets and everything, so.
I just want to make sure we have that on the record.
So the biggest part of all the FTE they fund for this program, what really stood out to me, and what I think we're going to really watch as CJC is how this works out, is that the .89 corrections peer recovery mentor. The folks are using recovery mentors more and more, and this person's going to act as sort of a navigator. So I think we're also going to have to watch. It looks like they're going to have to use some of these things a little bit conservatively because of funding and because of the amount of people that are going to need these resources. So I think we're going to just, going forward, really try and track or have them track who's getting these services, who needed them and didn't get them. And we'll see what that looks like going forward.
10 to 25.
Lynn County Program 2 is the prison reentry program. What really stood out to me in this program is that it's got 1.92 FTE of peer recovery mentors. So not only are they operating as navigators, which really is cutting edge in this, to make that part of a program, but it helps with a seamless transition from folks in custody to programming out in the community. So I think CJC is definitely going to watch and look, and the rest of the state should watch and look and see how this kind of an investment in recovery mentors as navigators and helping with that seamless transition, what kind of impact that has, and if it does develop some sort of trust and get more program utilization. We also asked them a question. We thought this was really important because they were talking about taking drug offenses. So we asked them, would this program take repeat property offenders, delivery, manufacturing, things of that nature? Yes, all may be accepted if on probation or on downward departure or in drug court. So it is open and they are receptive to serving all those folks.
That's great.
So that gave us confidence that they responded very quickly in the affirmative. The 10% victims piece, $155,496. ABC House, medical exams, forensic interviews, trauma counseling. This is something we've seen across counties. And family support services and advocacy. Center Against Rape and Domestic Violence. Services support those affected by sexual and domestic violence and provides leadership and education. I thought the education piece is good to have in there. And administrative costs, we pointed out, just, they were using actually less than their 10% requirement. It's kind of worth mentioning that they didn't utilize all of their 10% for admin, which means that they were really putting it towards services. In terms of approval, CJC recommends approval for the first section and the victims panel.
Amended.
What's that?
First section
As
as
amended.
amended.
First section as amended for the 14,000. And the victims panel recommends approval in its entirety of the victims pieces.
Chair Williamson, can I make one clarification?
Yep.
On this slide? So the administrative costs actually get pulled out of their program costs. They're offering that up for the victims so that they could keep whole the 10% for the two. That's what the note indicates, is that they pulled those administrative costs, not out of the 10%, but out of the other portion to fund that. So I think that's helpful to know that.
Thank you.
Morrow County is next. Their total formula amount is $122,925. And if you look at their prison use, they are up a little bit. So their application is very simple. They're basically going to use one program. They're going to fund 75% of a probation officer. Their plan is to reduce caseloads and enable community corrections to be able to supervise more people in the community. So
Is this probation officer doing anything different than
Extraordinary.
any of the other probation officers?
well, they are going to, I think they're going to supervise some of the, okay, right. So they're going to be, they're also going to be conducting motivational interview training. And I think they're going to be supervising some of the employment stuff, right? Is that, am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, the biggest thing, I did a lot of the communication with Morrow County, so sorry about that. But the biggest thing with Morrow County is that they have really large caseloads right now. And so by bringing on another 0.75 FTE, they will be able to reduce their caseloads to an average of 40 per officer. And then they will be able to spend additional time with the people that they're supervising and get them to treatment more quickly, because right now they have a 3 to 4 week time lapse between when the offender can actually get to treatment and when they are asked to go. And so by having this additional PO, they'll be able to help transport these offenders and spend more quality time with them, where they can go through some of the evidence-based responses. Sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. So the Justice Reinvestment Grants are not enough to completely fund the position. The other 25% is going to come out of the Measure 57 funds that come from DAC. And we've spoken to them, and they think that this will potentially lead to more downward departures. They'll have smaller caseloads. They can supervise people more effectively. So they're getting at prison use that way.
So that's what we're measuring? Are those the metrics?
Yeah, so I think we're gonna want to see how their caseloads change, so their numbers to start with, and then they think that they're gonna be able to go down to closer to 40 people per caseload
Right.
from what they're at right now.
But when we evaluate them, will it be on downward departures and use of evidence-based practices or whatever, as opposed to just their caseload went down?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I
Should be
think,
able to do that pretty.
yeah, we'll
easily
be
if
able
we
to take
fund
all
a
that into
person.
account and kind of have a holistic view of all those things, and it should also, I think also their revocations will hopefully be effective. So,
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is when you're talking about counties the size of Morrow County, things can change with one big case that comes through the county.
Right.
So, I think we're definitely going to be watching that and seeing how the effect is and talking to them about that. But if we did see, for instance, a big increase, we'd ask them the question, well, why was this? And I mean, if the answer is some big drug ring was busted up
Sure.
in Morrow County, you know, we'll take that into account.
Right.
But
no.
we're gonna be absolutely tracking those numbers.
Yeah, and I get that, and I think it's just my concern, and it goes to the commissioner's concern a bit, is that in a year from now, when you are looking to release more money, and we're looking at metrics, when we're buying traditional staff, I wanna make sure that the metrics are really tied to 3194 as opposed to, well, they've reduced their caseload.
Right.
That's great, but that's not what we're funding that position for. So that should just be a natural outgrowth of having an extra person in that office. But if having that extra person increases downward departures and does all sorts of 3194 sorts of things, and we are tracking it, and we can tell that putting that money there actually moved the dial, I just want to make sure, kind of as a blanket statement, for all of the counties that have funded a position like this, or the increased DA positions, or whatever position we're funding, that we're not just tracking, bringing that person on and having them do the job that they were hired to do.
Right.
But instead, what resulted directly in the 3194 kind of wheelhouse out of that position being brought on.
I don't know if it's in the email, but that captures the spirit of our initial conversation with them, which was focused on quality of supervision.
Right.
Which should have an impact.
Right. So, thank you.
So for the victims, 10%, that is gonna go to Umatilla Morrow Domestic Violence, and this is gonna be for direct service to victims. They're gonna use this as outreach, as well as to rent some office space in Hefner, and that's gonna be staffed by volunteers and interns, is my understanding, which is why they're able to do it for $12,000. And so overall, both are recommended for approval by CJC staff and then by the victims panel.
Questions? All right. Polk County.
So Polk County is getting around 561,000, rounded up. They too are a little bit up in comparison to all of their neighboring counties, but as you can see, the entire region in this area is also up. So one thing to note, Polk County is looking to fund one new program as well as 2 existing programs as we go through them. So the new program is this caseload specialist. These are going to be targeted offenders that will be supervised by the community corrections and are at risk of being sentenced to prison. So they're going to play kind of a navigator role. They're going to establish case plans, help them sign up for OHP, help them with employment, transportation, again, housing, all of those things that make it easier for offenders to live within the community and be supervised effectively. This caseload specialist will also work with the local employers to try to increase the opportunity for these people that have been convicted of a felony to obtain employment. That's a kind of new and innovative idea, and as we reached out to them, we asked if this was a program that was already up and running, and it's not yet. So this is a brand new idea, a brand new thing. We've also reached out and asked how they came up with this model and what they're kind of creating it after, and I don't think that they've gotten back to us with any specific information to that yet, but we have asked, so we're going to be actively watching how that unfolds if you guys approve it and we end up funding it.
Tiffany, here was another, and I noted in that downward departure will be considered. What conversation did you have with them on this topic?
So I actually had the exact question if you wanted me to.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, so they had noted that they take medium to high risk offenders, and they referenced those in their narratives, but there was no specific mention of downward departures. And I simply asked, does this program accept downward departures? And that's where they gave the response that you're reading there, Senator. And they have never been, and they say not only do they accept them, but they have never been excluded from any form of programming from our office. So they're a pretty clear statement that they're going to take downward departures. So not just medium to high risk.
But again, to your point of they will consider additional
Yeah.
downward departures that's that consider word where
That
they
considered
may
word,
or may
they may
not.
or they
and
may
so
not.
that's one
And
thing where we will have to watch
even
it
though
and pay
they-
close
yes.
attention, even though they are willing to accept them. Will they or won't they, and what's their criteria around that? That's something that's to be determined, and one of those topics that kind of has to be worked out as we go down the road. Because consider was the language that they were willing to give us.
I have a question about the whole downward departure discussion. What is it, is there a baseline measure for downward departures? So have you looked at, for example, Polk County and how many they have now, and then how are you gonna measure the increase or decrease the number of downward departures gathered?
Yeah, we've been tracking that since the beginning in the RICS, and we can pull that data on a yearly basis. We can go back multiple years to see what their intakes are, so as not to kind of be skewed by maybe one year that's really up or one year that's really down. Kind of take a longer look. But we can very specifically look at property and drug intakes and whether or not and how many of those are downward departures and if their intakes have increased or not.
And when you're talking about increase, you're talking about, or intake, you're talking about prison intake, or, so what I'm asking is, from court to the community, can you track those downward departures?
So DOC just is adding the capacity to do that, and so I don't know the exact date of when it starts. So once they've added it into their data field, which I think was earlier this year, then we can track it forward, but we wouldn't have the historical piece of it. So they've added that to their data tracking.
Thanks.
For the record, Polk County did pass their measure.
Yes, they did. They hired a lot of sheriff staff with it. Yep. Okay, moving on to the next program, unless there's further questions. The transitional housing. So they are specifically looking to expand their female transitional housing for high-risk felony offenders that are coming out of jail and prison in the female population. They will also be increasing sexual offender beds for the male population as well. For drug court and adjust, this is based off of the Thinking for Change model. Drug court is a voluntary program for medium to high-risk offenders who have not been to prison for the past 10 years. We reached out to them because we noticed that right away, and it was a little bit concerning to us why they would not consider people that had been to prison within the last 10 years. And they're of the understanding that that's a national drug court standard. What we have since gone back out with and told them is that Oregon has its own standards, and we would like them to look into following that model and encouraging that. So we are encouraging them to take a new look at that rule that they have in their drug court to try to get some more people that might be eligible into the drug court. But that being a side note, Adjust is available to all offenders regardless of being involved in the drug court or having been involved in prison in the past 10 years. It doesn't matter. Don't discriminate, for lack of a better word. All of their 9 POs in Polk County will be trained in the Thinking for Change model and be able to distribute that curriculum. And they will do so on a more regular basis as prescribed by the Thinking for Change model. They just call it Adjust, but it is Thinking for Change model.
And can I just add a piece that I looked around and I couldn't find anything. Our draft of our Oregon standards for drug courts is crosswalked thoroughly with the national standards, and I couldn't find anything in the national standards. Maybe there's something historically that I haven't been able to dig up yet that says something about this 10-year waiting period if someone's been incarcerated.
You asked Judge Lucan?
I did not.
You might want to ask him. You might have something that.
Moving on to the victim services. They will be funding 3 programs with $60,000. So their minimum requirement was a little more than $55,000. They've chosen to add an additional amount to bring that up to 60 to cover the 3 organizations that they are choosing to provide for. So Liberty House is one. They focus on child abuse or neglect. and they will be working with that organization to fund the salaries, subsidize the salaries, I guess, of the clinical team that provides those direct services. So
I might add, they're moving into a new facility, so they're expanding their capacity so that they're able to actually serve a larger client base. That was just recent. They've been in a real fundraising mode and have been quite successful in trying to expand that capacity of working with children and their parents. So
the next organization is Sable House. Thank you for that ad. They are a voluntary program that actually focuses on victims helping themselves. So they provide the comprehensive case management that helps someone understand, okay, I'm a victim, okay, how do I help myself, so that you're not always relying on other people. They take that next step to get these victims just a little bit farther. And then Polk County will also be contributing to the Confederate Tribe of Grand Ronde in their county, and they will be directly providing direct service, or directly funding direct services with those funds.
Do they do any of that now?
Which?
Provide direct service to the tribes?
The tribes provide their own direct service. They have a domestic violence group, as well as sexual violence and other things. So they will just be contributing to that. But they do have a program set up, and I believe, I would have to look back at my notes, but I believe that the domestic violence piece was set up back in 2012. It's somewhat recent.
Somewhere.
So somewhere within the last 5 years for sure. Based on all of our review and work to communicate with Polk County and try to get some clarification on those topics that we discussed earlier, we do recommend approval for that. The victims panel has recommended approval, and so I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? Right. Washington County.
All right, Washington County. Total formula amount is $3.7 million. And looking at their prison use, they are up slightly. But still using less overall than Lane and Marion. So their main program is the IRIS program. That's something that's already been started and is going to be expanded a little bit with this money. I think it's a very good program from what I know about it. I got to go talk to the Washington County LIPSIC on Friday and heard a lot about their program and a lot of the ins and outs. They assess people at the beginning. They use several different assessments that are listed in the application, and that's prior to sentencing. And then a recommendation is made regarding whether or not they can be safely managed in the community. If they receive probation, then that assessment determines what their probation conditions are. If they get a prison sentence, then that assessment goes to helping determine what their programming would be while they're in prison, and then also their release plan when they do get out of custody. So it's a very strong program. Uses a lot of evidence-based stuff and a lot of data. They can get a lot of information out of it. Their other program is the Jail Justice Reinvestment Initiative, and this is basically someone or people in the jail who work on employment mentors, help people get social security cards, housing, mental health things like that. They started in the jail so that when people get out, they're not kind of released to the street and then have to try to go connect with all these services. But they try to get that going while the person's in the jail so they have a better chance of success when they leave. And then for their victims piece, they're splitting it between 3 groups. The Domestic Violence Resource Center, that's going to support 2 community advocate positions that'll work on protective orders, so restraining orders, elder and disabled abuse orders, and stalking orders, things like that. The Mary Mac House, this is going to provide 5 domestic violence survivor households at a time with short-term housing, and also with support services so they can try to get employment, things like that, get back on their feet so that they won't need to use the short-term housing. And then SARC is going to increase their mental health program staff so they can serve more sexual assault victims. So we thought this was a really good application. Recommendations for approval on both parts.
Questions? All right. Last but not least, Yamhill County.
Yamhill County's baseline is 902,000 approximately. As you can see, they're a little bit high, but they are not red like the other regions in their, or the other counties in their region, so that's positive. They are funding one existing program and working to enhance what they already have in the county, so it's established. They do an analysis right now that targets presumptive prison, non-person felony offenses on a pre-sentence level. So they look at the LSCMI and the ASIS, Adult Substance Abuse Program, or Adult Substance Abuse Survey, to determine the analysis on whether or not they can safely manage these offenders in the community or not. So they want to enhance that in addition to adding a case analysis program that would identify pre-sentence medium to high risk offenders that were probation bound, to conduct this risk assessment and make a recommendation for them on the conditions of probation, as well as identify the risk for the short-term trans leave. They also will be providing short-term trans leave housing with some of these funds and increasing their ability for pretrial justice, which would be based on risk assessment rather than the subjectivity of judgment and crime severity. With that pretrial jail program, they will be adding in a court date reminder system. So something automatically will go out to offenders to remind them, you have court date coming up, so don't forget and show up. That will try to help reduce that recidivism of getting penalized for not showing up to their court dates on time. That's their program. And then for the victims 10%, the Henderson House Shelter and Advocacy Center, that's going to support a bilingual advocate. So I thought that was a positive thing that they would be housing with that. It was the only bilingual reference that we saw in all of the 15 programs that we evaluated. And then they're also going to do additional trauma-informed training for their staff. For Juliet's House, that is the Children's Advocacy Center for Yamhill, also serves Polk and Tillamook counties as well, but that's what Yamhill chose to focus on. And they're going to provide direct intervention services for their clinical support team. Any questions?
All right. Any questions generally for the staff on anything we've seen today? Comments? Yeah.
How many counties are in the full application process versus the early application? How many do you have a feel are not going to be involved at all?
15 were in the first, so 21 in the second.
We have not heard from any county that they don't plan on applying. So we believe we're anticipating getting the balance of the 36, so 21 more counties by the full deadline.
And so it'll be the same process for us.
Yeah, and so
21 counties.
that's one of the things is, as we went through this process today, it'd be useful for myself and staff for feedback and comments about, the process of how we did this and what could be helpful to you as you make these evaluations. So we can talk about that when we're eating lunch.
Excellent. All right, Senator
Madam
Winters.
Chair, I move that we approve the applications and the recommendations of CJC with the Lynn County amendments, and I understand that our good member is going to abstain.
So Ms. Parker Rose, sorry, will abstain from the Klamath County
Vote.
recommendation. So we just want to make sure we get that on the record. So Senator Winters has moved that we approve a motion that all of the applications move to the CJC with a recommendation for approval. Lynn County as amended.
Second.
Are there any objections? All right, so moved. So with that, Mike, do you want to tell us what's next and what we can expect before we adjourn for lunch?
Yeah, so next in this process, the CJC commissioners are getting together on Thursday to then kind of go through the same thing that you all have gone through today and have their chance to weigh in on the applications. They've also received all of them in advance, and so we'll be having the same discussion, and they will know what your outcome was. And then once that happens, assuming that they approve the grants as you all did, we then will enter into contracts with the counties, set up exactly how the money's going to get out and what the expectations are, and really kind of get it all done legally. And then we plan on getting the checks out to the counties, I believe, mid-October, so around October 15th or so. Right around that range of time. So that's the next step for this phase, and then
For this phase for these counties.
for this phase for these counties. And the next deadline, or the full deadline, is October 14th. Yeah, is October 14th. So we will then have received the balance, the 21 counties that we haven't received so far. Our staff currently is already in the process of working with them, same kind of thing, giving them feedback, answering questions, proofreading. Then once we get those applications at that phase, we'll get those out to you as far in advance as we can so that you have time to read over those and schedule another meeting for you all and finish out the process that way.
Any thoughts on when that meeting might be?
On our calendar.
It's on our calendar right now for November 9th at 9 a.m.
It's good to know.
So hopefully it's on your calendar too.
So hopefully we will have completed all the processes by the time we come into the next session.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah, we should have completed everything and given money out to everybody. And
By then.
hopefully we'll be getting some results back. When do you think, Mike, is the first time we can see how things are going realistically?
Yeah, you know, it's obviously there's startup time for a lot of these programs and investments. So, I mean, we certainly, I think we definitely should be starting to see some of the early results by the midpoint of next year, so that kind of June going into the next fiscal year. I think that will be that will be where we're really looking at the counties. And hopefully then, I mean, all programs should be up and running hopefully before the new year really gets started.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
So does that mean outputs and outcomes mid next year? And then when will it integrate with this data to figure out the bigger picture?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be tracking that, you know, all the way through. I mean, continuing even to today before the programs are even in. So we'll have that data all along the process.
All integrated.
Yeah.
Looking at timelines, Mike, is it your, when we get into some of the pre-session activity, particularly I'm looking at September, October of preceding, are you hopeful that you'll begin to have some outcome data by then?
A year from now? Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I also, when I pointed out November 9th to Mike, that's actually when our victims panel is meeting next. So that's when that's scheduled for. We don't have you guys on our calendar yet, so I apologize. That was my bad. Sorry.
We'll get that nailed down as soon as we can.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments for the good of the order? All right. I want to thank everybody for all the reading that they did and the good questions and conversation today. And thank you again, staff, for all your hard work on this and for helping the counties get their applications in order for us. So with that, I'm going to adjourn.